Well, if you ask what are the CBs are construction battalions to support the Marines. And the CBs were born in March of 1942 in direct response to the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 41. In the past, the Bureau of Docks and the Civil Engineering Corps of the Navy would hire civilian contractors to do much of that work. But that put civilians in the way of the Japanese who were invading islands in the Pacific and made them, or they would be considered non-soldiers, not be subject to the Geneva Conventions, and could be considered terrorists and subject to execution. So the CBs were formed immediately by hiring experienced construction people to come directly into the military on very little training and start commencing construction jobs for the Marines. We arrived in the dark either on the night of the 23rd or the early morning of the 24th of May, 1972. When we got off the plane, first thing we did was unload every other plane that landed. We unloaded our plane, which had some equipment, including weapons carriers, some other equipment, a small bulldozer, and a few other little things in it. And immediately we were told to set our sea bags aside and wait for the next plane to pull up. And we probably went for about 3 to 5 days. I mean, we didn't sleep except for laying on cargo between airplanes. We just unloaded plane after plane after plane, made sure that we had whatever we unloaded out of the way so the next plane could come. There was one incident when we were first unloading planes, one plane after the other, and we were dog tired, and we had taken our K-bar knives and cut our pants off and were standing there with nothing but our shorts on and boots, waiting for the next plane to come down. A plane landed, the tailgate fell down, and these Marines come running out of that thing like a shot, jumping behind the landing gear, pulling out their M16s, pointing them around, and we were leaning up against the cargo laughing our butts off. But, you know, it was the same thing. When we got on the plane, nobody would tell us where we were going. Even when we were on the plane, we asked the pilot, "Where are we going?" He said, "I can't tell you, it's classified." We said, "Well, who are we going to tell? We're on the plane with you. And when we land, we'll be there. Where is it?" They still wouldn't tell us. And so I'm sure the Marines that were coming out of Da Nang had the same thing in mind. They didn't know where they were going, and they had their weapons with them. So what were they going to do? They were going to protect themselves. So, but it was quite humorous. So when I mentioned that to a fellow attendee here, he said, "That was us. That was my group. They told us when the hatch went down, you get off this damn place." And they came running out, and he said they saw people out there going, "Whoa, whoa, what are you doing?" And that was us laughing at them. But not laughing at them, but laughing at the situation, is because we were in the same, when we got off the plane, it was the same thing for us. We got off in the dark, we didn't know where we were. We were just told to get the plane empty. So we got the thing out of there, but we had our weapons inside, locked in a Conex box, so we didn't have access to them, or we probably would have done something similar. Well, I was a steel worker in an E5, second class petty officer steel worker in the CBs. My job was to organize small crews and complete construction jobs having to do with steel working, anywhere from tying rebar and pouring concrete all the way up to assembly of metal buildings. They formed a special company in Nam Pong for MCB5, my battalion, called Echo Company, made up of 37 men. And our job was erection of anything that you see above the ground plane in Nam Pong. We probably put it up. From wonder arches to the metal storage tanks for water to airfield matting for the aprons of the airfield. Buildings, we even when we first got there, we're doing woodwork, which was building frames for the strongback tents and dragging canvas tents over the top of those structures so that the next group of CBs would have a place to sleep where it was dry. The tents themselves came in kits, but the lumber that we used was local. We contracted with local suppliers and had local farmers, whoever was there. Plus, we set up our own sawmill. So you may have seen some elephants when you were in Thailand, but they helped move the raw lumber towards our sawmill to be cut up into lumber to be used. So one of the things that was really odd for us and was using wet, uncured lumber to try to make something square and straight out of something that might just, when it dried, warp like a rocking chair. There were local, well, we call them elephant drivers. There were local elephant operators around, people who owned elephants who would lease them out, to the CBs to move things when we couldn't get there. There were times when a track machine could not traverse the mud. It would just get sunk in the mud. So when we had large logs to move and things to move out of the way, we would use the elephant operators would come in, and they would laugh sometimes because our equipment was bogged down and their elephants could just walk right in there and chain up to a log and drag it out. Well, there was a runway there, but there had been no infrastructure in place and no grand planning for drainage other than the drainage of the runway itself. So when it rained, the water stood wherever it rained, or it drained off wherever it would naturally be. So there were swampy areas. There were no really hilly areas in the area. But when it rained, when we saw it rain, it turned into a quagmire. The opposite of that is when we first got there, it was at the very end of the dry season, and everything that had been wet the year before was baked solid. We couldn't drive a wooden stake in the ground. We had to make our own stakes out of metal fence posts. The first sets of structures we put up in order to keep material dry were these circus tents. There would be 2 and 3 pole circus tents. And we had to lay those out and drive stakes in the ground in order to tie ropes to them in order to be able to stand the post up and use the pulley to pull the canvas up. So we had a heck of a time with that ground being so hard. But within a few months, within a few weeks actually, when the rain started, that turned into a quagmire. I'm from Texas. I was used to working in the fields when it's 100, 105 degrees. So the adaptation to 110 degrees when it's very humid, it was a tough adaptation, but I had some experience. I had to train my men that every time there was a break, you took a drink of water. Every time there was a break, any time that you were not heavily engaged in work yourself, you found some shade, even if it was just what we used to call flagpole shade. If it's just the shadow of a tree and not the branches itself. You stand in that little bit of shade, and that would help keep your body temperature down. But we had people from the Midwest and from the North, from upstate New York, from Minnesota, and those kind of areas who had to be taught how to behave in the heat. When the sun was overhead, only the ground underneath the large trees was shady. So, and it was covered with vegetation that might have been 6 to 8 feet high, just very rapidly growing grasses and large leaf plants that grew seemingly overnight. I swear at night when we were sleeping, we could hear that stuff growing out there. But there was no place for someone to stand out of the, when we first got there was no place to stand in the shade. There was no shade to be had unless you wanted to go walk in where was room where there were tigers and snakes. It's strange because I was in the CBs and very few people even know what the CBs are. After I got out of the service, if someone asked me what I did in the service and I would start to tell them, they would think I was full of baloney. There's nobody that could relate to what we did. So there was, except maybe another CB or a Marine. So it was really hard to find anybody to talk to about what we did. Because they didn't really understand, and most of the time they thought we were just exaggerating. Nobody works for us 120 degrees. Nobody can work 14 hours a day, 50, 60 days straight. But the truth is that does happen, and that's just what the CBs do. We did what we were sent to do, and we did it in short order. We had, amongst ourselves, the enlisted men, We took pride in the fact that the officers could schedule our work for us, and we would look at the schedule and find some way to bust the schedule. They told us when we got off the plane that they said, we know this was like an impossible task, but we need a fully operational airbase here within 11 months. We did it in 3.5.